Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Hannah Spier, who describes herself as an anti-feminist psychiatrist. She's doing a great job exposing how feminist and liberal ideas are screwing up our society. Hello, Hannah.
Hi, Petina. Great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you. I've never talked to anyone in Switzerland before on video. So that's very exciting. And you're actually from Norway originally, but now you live in Switzerland and you're a full-time mum with three children, which must be something that tends to get up the nose of many of the feminists you're criticizing.
A little bit. Yeah, I can always say, this is such a fulfilling job. And well, I quit my hospital job once I had my first child
Yep.
because I came to realize that I had been lied to and that this was a much more important job looking at it long term. That what
Yeah.
I was holding on to by insisting on working was really ego and pride
Okay.
rather than looking at the family harmony, what was best for the family unit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is not a particularly popular view at the moment. um, but yeah, I must say I totally understand where you're coming from, and I do think it's an incredibly important job to do. You have a Substack and a YouTube channel called Psychobabble, which I love, and it's a wonderful name, which is all about exposing, well, the psychobabble, which is polluting the minds, particularly of young women. Tell me a bit about what you're doing and why.
Yeah, so I started Psychobabble because I got increasingly annoyed at all the false messaging and all the ways that I saw modern psychology and psychotherapy not helping, but rather doing the opposite, contributing to our poor mental health. And I started to expose this bad therapy and all these, I say, liberal narratives that
Mhm.
do this, and how therapists are distorting established psychological knowledge, as I call it, to for their own agendas, because they have become activists first and clinicians second. So that's what I started. I started to write. It was actually at my husband's request because I was just screaming at the television when we were watching something. And this is wrong, and this is, and he's like, just start writing it up,
Yeah.
and I did without any sort of goal in mind. And then I would say 7 months ago, the my Substack took off, and I realized that this is something people are hungry to hear, and a lot of people have been in therapy for much longer than they should, or they're on their second and third therapist, and it's not working, and they're saying, yes, this what you're describing, this is exactly me. And I focus a lot on the feminist narrative because I think that that is the crown jewel of psychobabble. This is really the big lie that has sent our whole society just spiraling.
Yeah. And the message from feminists, when you're talking about the sort of wrong messages that women are receiving, the sort of me, promoting women as victims, encouraging false expectations. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest lies they are not, I think, out of a malicious agenda from the women themselves, from normal women. It's that they believe that, for example, um, s- having kids is right for some women and wrong for other women, and that the split is 50-50. That is just as likely that having kids is wrong for you, that you'll never get that call to motherhood,
Mhm.
and or that career will just always feel as important to you as it does when you're 25. And we don't know that there's a shift coming, and we need to get ready for that shift. I'm talking about when we turn 30, and that, that biological clock start ticking. That's a cliche for a reason, because it points to a decline in our ovarian reserves that has us, our goal shifts towards fulfilling our maternal desires. And so, but this is a lie that we have been told, that this won't happen, or that it's just as likely that it won't happen to you. And I try to then take that lie, and I try to say, it's a very small subset of women for whom motherhood never gets to be a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a certain personality structure, that's probably not going to be you. So this is an example of the things that I'll point out
Yeah.
through Psychobabble.
Yeah, I think it's very important. But I was particularly interested when you wrote recently about psychology, and particularly how psychology has been taken over by ideology. And that was very close to home for me, because when I started, I trained, over 50 years ago to be a clinical psychologist. And what attracted me was I came from a science background, and psychology was supposed to be about, seeking truth through quantifiable empirical research. It was supposed to be a science, and something has gone very wrong, as you pointed out in your blog and your YouTube. Tell us
Yes.
what's happened.
Yeah.
What's happened to psychology?
Well, I think it went through what many of the humanities went through in the 70s during the Cultural Revolution, that it was taken over by postmodern ideas
Mhm.
and influences. And you see it when you go through. So I had a little look around, and the curriculum, and they slowly shifted from this view, this that there's an objective truth, and that psychology should be about trying to measure human behavior uh, with quantifiable data.
Mhm.
And slowly they started to, because this shifted over to a very relativistic view, that there's no objective truth, there's everyone's subjective truth, and then including a lot of qualitative data. So now on psychological research, we've moved very much away from this positivist paradigm that you're talking about,
Mhm.
that we tried to be, psychology tried to be established as a science. And now we have research papers that are based on something like, for example, 4 case studies, and then you call that research. And so what happens is that, you probably heard of this, because that was in Australia, with this anti Andrew Tate study from Monash
Mhm.
University. And that passed peer review. It was plastered across the newspapers, but it was purely based on this qualitative research data, where they'd done interviews, um, not in a structured way, not examining all participants involved, simply uh, interviewing female teachers, not the male teachers, and female students, and then said, this is what we came up with based on these interviews. And then that's passed off as research and peer reviewed, and papers pick it up and say, this is all the negative influence from Andrew Tate. And this could not have happened if we didn't shift to accepting qualitative research.
Yep.
And you go to the curriculums, you see very prominently displayed that there's no definite view in psychology, which is a strange thing to say if you're aiming to be a science. and and then we end up with having these bad theories, never being challenged, never being discounted. And so you can be a psychologist or a psychiatrist and then simply say, "Oh no, I followed this school of thought,"
Yep. I think I
even
sent you
though
I noticed
you're getting awful
they're running a
results.
training course on this idea of anti-feminism and Andrew Tate, and, you know, toxic masculinity and blah blah blah. So
Mm.
not only did this, we see this in newspapers across the country, this rubbish research from Monash University, but now they're making money by training other psychologists with this, nonsensical stuff. But as you say, this is
Yeah,
I could give you a dozen examples of that, where the media will take up some story. No one looks at the data. No one tries to replicate the data. That's one of the points you make. I mean,
yeah,
replication was one of the keys to doing proper psych research. You have to not just show it once, you have to be able to repeat that and get the same answer. And all that's gone out the window too, hasn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, there's a very a replication crisis, as they
yeah,
call it, going on in psychology. But a lot of fields have replication crisis because they have this publish or perish culture. But the difference is that psychology students aren't aware of the replication crisis. That's not something anyone's trying to correct. So they did in 2000, was it 2012 or
mhm,
2015, this big study where they picked 100 of the most prominent studies and they tried to replicate it, only being able to replicate 36%.
yep.
And that's obviously a crisis, but I think it's worse that they're not told about it. So that's the difference, that they don't see why this is a problem. And then you get, especially because psychology has such a popular appeal. So people are watching reel after reel on social media saying, "Oh, this is new and this, and if you do this, if you have if you stand in front of the mirror and you smile at yourself, this will boost your self-esteem." Although self-esteem as a concept has been debunked a long time ago. That's not a thing. It shouldn't continue to be promoted by people in the mental health field. But
Funny
this is
enough,
how it
let me.
sort of, yeah.
Sorry to butt. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Um, the self-esteem thing really interests me because a friend of mine, Roy Baumeister, eminent professor now in America, he was in Australia for a while. I mean, he's got a lot of strings to his bow. He's made his reputation in many areas, but this was one of the major pieces of research he did, was debunking this idea that self-esteem was so important to people's progress in life. And you can explain a bit more about that. I mean, he essentially showed that's not what makes a difference to people's results, people's self-satisfaction. Anyway, you probably explain it better than me, Hillary. Yeah, that'd be great.
I mean, self-esteem and I think this was, I showed actually his research when I wrote about that,
Yeah,
that all it does is, at best, it'll boost your sort of positive emotions for a very short period of time, only to dip again. Because what you really need, what we mean with self-esteem, is are simply just traits in extroversion and decreased neuroticism. Because people are very neurotic, and females are more neurotic than men. We're very sensitive to negative emotion. And so that's where you then need to work, and you can manage to calm neuroticism, but not if you call it something else.
yeah,
And it's really just it's really just feeling self-conscious, thinking about how you're looking, and feeling negatively about it, which is a part of neuroticism. And so you need to work with the categories and definitions that we have proven. And I mean, the big five personality model is the one thing that we've managed to replicate across cultures. So why aren't we working with those concepts instead of continuing to increase something that they're not able to prove is a valid concept?
yeah, yeah. I mean that. I mean, yeah, it's such a major problem. I sort of grind my teeth every time I read our media because it's full of this, as you say, psychobabble of psych research of what claims to be psych research, which is so poorly constructed and often so biased. I suppose what really rankles me, of course, is the anti-male material that is now across the board in a lot of psychology. And I think it's hardly surprising that we have so few men left in psychology in Australia. I don't know what the figures are like in Switzerland. We've got 70 to 80% women in psych courses across the country, over 80% in all the higher degrees. And I've talked to people who are in these courses, males who are in these courses. Any pro male views are just howled out while they're in these training courses. And if you try to present, something that counters the feminist thinking in whatever they're being taught about, you just don't get a look in. And, it really worries me that so many of these people will end up in whatever, couple counseling or, as experts writing reports in the family courts or whatever. And they're being trained to have this anti-male bias. Is that something you see in, always, obviously your background is in Norway, but now in Switzerland. Are you aware of that sort of anti-male feeling in psychology there?
Absolutely, and I have personal experience with that. For example, and it's very subtle, so you have to sort of know what to look for. So it's almost you can only see it if you're actively fighting men's men's issues for men's issues. I mean, for example, I was at in every clinic I worked in, and I worked both in Norway and in Switzerland. You'll always have these clinicians meetings. So all the clinicians, they get together once or twice a week in a group, and you discuss your cases to have help or just to talk it through, and it can be useful. But then you'll see, so someone was talking about a woman that she had in her therapy, and how awful the marriage, they had marital strain, and how unfair she felt life was. This patient, feelings of unfairness, feelings of she was doing a lot more of the domestic work, and then so this patient was she was working in a reduced position, so she was working 60% and had a much lower paying job than the husband, which was something that I then asked about because I was wondering about the dynamics.
Yeah.
And so I asked about this, how the salary of the husband, and the to sort of sort of examine what the financial situation was, if it was such that she could have more help. Yeah. And the reaction I got to asking about the husband's salary was just, it was like blood in the water. It was just, how could it's irrelevant and judgmental, and not even worth looking at. The room became completely silent, and I mean, it was never answered. It was never addressed. It was just pushed away as irrelevant, and let's move on. But for me, it was very relevant because if he takes the lion's share of why should he, the issue at hand was, she had to get up in the night to for with the kids, and I wanted to point out how perhaps if the household was very dependent on his salary, him being fresh and able to perform at work would be something that should factor into this marital strife and maybe be pointed out to this patient. Because in my experience, when you increase understanding, and when you feel very angry and unfairly for the partner, that helps. And what you want is alleviation of those negative emotions. But to encourage any understanding or sympathy towards the husband, that was just a pure no go.
Yep.
And I can just imagine that she's probably still in therapy. because all she does, and this is this feminist therapy that is that really has permeated how female clinicians in general perform therapy, is this very focus on female victimhood, just letting that flourish, just affirming them in their oppression.
Yeah.
And you do that directly when you refuse to encourage understanding for men's situations.
Yeah.
And I know that from my personal, I mean, when I quit my job and my husband worked and we were very dependent on him. Had he been fired, we would have been belly up immediately. He never got up in the night with the kids. That was my job. But you look at it in such a way when you refuse to see the financial situation for what it is, and you just discount male needs because that's what it is. Why should we think about his need for sleep? Right? Something that to us is just, of course, we would think about that. But if you're doing feminist therapy, that's not, it's not palatable.
Yeah. I mean, that whole, as you've said, it's all about the politics of resentment, isn't it? It's about teaching women to resent their husbands, um, or resent their situation, and give no credence, no thanks to their husbands for their
Yeah,
contribution to the marriage. And that's all, the male
yeah,
contribution is always downplayed, while the woman's, as you say, victimhood is exaggerated and exploited.
yeah. And they are. I would go as far as to say that I think most women now, young women, enter relationships and marriage with a baseline resentment towards men
Yeah.
because they're so ingrained, so indoctrinated in this lack of understanding for men's situations, this inability to look at their situation. And
Yep.
so everything becomes this, what, because what I hear from them in these circles and from my own patient is this knee jerk reaction. What about me? Why doesn't he do it? Does he get to? Why don't I?
Yep.
One of the most important, most common complaints now from wives, be they stay at home or working mothers, is this mental load. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That women have more mental load than men. And this is as because and we have data on this now that fathers now, they do a lot more work than they used to. So they have their job and they're doing a lot of domestic chores in addition.
Yep.
And so this mental load concept is one of these symptoms of that resentment, I
Yep.
think.
And the mental load, we
Because it's
don't talk about
what can we
men's
complain
mental
about
load.
now?
We don't talk about the mental load of having to pay the mortgage and what if I lose my job and maybe I need to take another job. you know, I mean, this
Yes, yes.
drain on.
They don't.
I'll
They're
tell
not
you
as
a funny
vocal
thing.
with their anxieties.
Yeah.
They're not, we're very vocal with all of our negative emotions, and they are vocal when they are only when they are pushed and when they snap, and then they're like, listen here, and that's the first time we'll hear about all of their sleepless nights, what they're worried about. And that's a problem, but we are not, I mean, as a wife, I think you should be able to see that without him having to snap and then tell you everything.
Yeah.
But if you're resentful, that will stop that immediately.
I know, I thought of a funny example. Do you know a television program called Grand Designs?
No.
Oh, it's all over. I mean, I know it's in Australia and England and so on. It's a very good program about people building houses and often very fancy houses, and couples starting off with a plan to build the house, and they follow through how it all works out. And it tends to go very wrong, mainly because they have very grand designs of what they want. But what's fascinating about that to me is watching the men turn grey overnight, because you can see more
Yeah.
often than not it's the the major burden in terms of finances falls on the man, and almost invariably the budget blows out, And you watch these men, sometimes the house will take a couple of years, but it is this incredible aging process of the stress of dealing with that. And, obviously there are many women who worry a lot in that situation, but it's particularly striking to watch the men and see the burden of being still, in many cases, the breadwinner or the person who's bringing in the most of the money. And we
Hmm.
never talk about that anymore. It used to be acknowledged. Don't worry, your dad, he's had a hard day at work. We have to look after him. All that's gone now, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm quite astounded at that when I see here in Switzerland, most women have they don't work 100%. It's having a part-time job for women is it's available and it's
Yeah,
common. It's very common, and I'm always surprised at how little that affects the splitting of the domestic chores. They
yeah,
tend to remain they remain the same, and that's just yeah, it's not good for men, and I think yeah, I mean here 80-85% of clinicians are female,
yeah,
and if you're not aware of that baseline resentment and inability to see men's needs, to I will say even unwillingness
yeah,
to see male needs, how can that not affect men in therapy?
yeah. And is it only one
Because
that men
that's
don't
also
want to
a
go to
concern.
psychologists, or don't, I mean, particularly psychologists
Yes.
who end up doing couple counseling, there immediately gets this allegiance between the female psychologist and the woman agreeing that she has every right to be resentful, and the man is locked out. And I've been writing and talking about this for many years, and it's a problem
Mm.
that's only going to get worse. I was talking to one of my friends who's been in academic psychology for many years, and he's leaving because he said he cannot stand the bias, and he thinks his position is
Really.
intolerable now. I think we'll see fewer and
Yeah.
fewer men in psychology.
And it's such a shame because they're suffering more and more in the suicide epidemic among men. It's something that gets very little attention, and it's very concerning.
Yeah,
The substance abuse rates as well. And one of these examples is that we female clinicians have no idea what men need different in therapy as
yeah,
well. They're not mostly comfortable with sitting face to face opposite each other and talking. That is just biologically an uncomfortable position for men because they take it as a challenge. They need to this just get up and go for a walk. If you have a male client, you go for a walk. Or you go somewhere where you can sit and look at something rather than face and face. These simple things, we're not taught that.
no,
Female therapists, they don't know about that. Or that men process much better if they're building something or doing something actively instead of sitting. Because what psychotherapy largely is now is this coddling of the negative emotions. That's
yeah,
what you do in therapy. You sit and investigate the emotions, trying to look at it from a non judgmental angle and just sort of hold your feelings in your hands and look at it, and it doesn't belong to you. Like all these different things. All it does is increase the neuroticism
yeah,
because we need to go out and do and distract ourselves and try to become more competent. That's how you calm anxiety, is to learn to be braver.
yeah,
And especially with men, they need to do and have. I told I had one male client once with panic attacks, and he's married and had a family. They had a managerial position, very tough one, and really had a brilliant career, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, in the middle of his 40s, panic attacks.
yeah,
Had no prior psychiatric history, suddenly panic attacks. And then so quickly he's prescribed sick leave, and his because of the therapy he's received, he's gone from I have an occasional panic attack that makes it difficult to travel from work to I'm sitting alone at home in the dark,
Oh,
don't know what to do, and I'm just sort of having more and more anxiety. So it goes then from infrequent panic attacks to daily general anxiety in a heartbeat because we don't know what men need. So I told
yeah,
him to build, like, we went through what he was good at and what he used to do, and it turns out he could make he had a this old boat, and so he started repairing this old boat, and so he just filled his schedule with things like this and male friends. And now if a husband goes to hang out with his guys, it's immediately, oh, he's not home, you would rather be with them than with me. This need for male friendships is treated very poorly,
yeah,
and that's just supported by female therapists who hold these same views.
yeah. That's right. I mean, I think we should say that there are some good psychologists. I have always had a few psychologists I refer men and women to who are very pro male as well as, and supportive of women as well, but, who are free of this ideology. What about, but I'm interested, your background is psychiatry. Um, I used to be very skeptical about psychology in the days when I was a firm believer in the empirical basis of psychology, because it struck me then that psychiatry was a real mess. I mean, you have medical training, which gives you the drug treatments and so on, which is a very important aspect of your work, but you wonder there was a lot of psychiatry that wasn't evidence based. Is that right?
That I didn't hear that last
Sorry, I'm saying
bit.
there was a
There
lot
was
of
a lot of
psychiatry
psychiatry.
that's not evidence based. Yeah,
Absolutely, and a lot of evidence is also ignored or hidden altogether. Um, the efficacy of antidepressants, for example, and the downplayed side effects of many psychiatric drugs, they are being ignored. And there's a real issue of informed consent. That's only to name a few. So I talk about that as well,
yeah,
and I'm very vocal about which I don't think it's an all or nothing. I think that there are cases where psychiatric medication work. I've seen it work wonders. So that it has an effect, that isn't disputable. But if it's a good effect, if the cost benefit analysis is correct, that's a different deal altogether. And I think a lot of it relies on a poorly defined diagnostic system.
yeah,
I think it's also something I address a lot, that we have, and I mean, now we're over 300 mental disorders in the DSM from 100 a few decades ago. And
yeah,
just that, it's the borders are poorly defined, and therapists are not aware of their own ideology, with which they see through which they see these disorders, and the end result of that, it's not to be judgmental and, oh, you don't have that mental disorder, you have this mental disorder. No, it's that you then get the wrong treatment if
yeah.
you are misdiagnosed. So that's my issue. I talk about that a lot as well.
And
And
you also talk about the American Psychological Association, which is of course the gatekeeper for psychological licenses, and it plays a very important role in these diagnosis, in determination of how things are going to be diagnosed. And yet, I mean, this is a major player when it comes to pushing certain ideologies, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah. But the APA has always been a political actor. That's what
Yeah,
I find so astounding. How they have so much power. Then we always meddled, and now recently immigration and racism and things that you wouldn't say. Maybe it has a sort of side. Okay, maybe with a stretch you can say that psychology is important for those, but they are. front page if you go into the APA's websites. And
Yeah.
they're the ones, they're still propping up this bogus implicit association test that has us all talking about a conscious bias, and
Yep.
everyone has a little bit of a racist in them. And they are still promoting this, which is not, it's not replicatable. Um it's not good research. And still the they're and they
No,
are
they're utterly
yeah.
shameless in that they promote
Mm.
areas like that, as you say, unconscious bias, which has been utterly debunked, and yet it's all still there. We have in Australia, we have what's called the Australian Psychology Society, the APS, which is our
Mm.
professional body, and I fought them for years on all sorts of issues. The same sort of thing where they promote theories that don't have any proper validity, don't have empirical research to
Yeah.
support them. The classic was a woman called Jennifer McIntosh who did research years ago on overnight care of infants. This is in relation to custody disputes. And she did this terrible research um, which she then used to promote around the world to discourage courts from allowing dads to have overnight care of infants and toddlers. And then you may know Hannah Richard Warshak, famous psychiatrist in America. He got together 110 experts on child development, and they looked carefully at the Macintosh research and what the did a meta-analysis of all the research on child development at that time, and said this research was rubbish. She cherry-picked her results. It didn't promote what she claimed it didn't prove what she claimed it proved. And so it was utterly debunked. And I had this huge fight, but the Psych Society continued to allow her article on overnight care of children was the policy for years and years and years on their website. So it goes on. The other one is, of course, this ghastly gender affirming care for children who are, have issues in terms of their gender. And it's like our Psych Society, it's been sitting there with promoting gender affirming care in this area without the proper evidence to support it. And they're now doing some sort of review, but they're still sitting on
Yeah.
the fence. I mean, issue after issue, they take an ideological position rather than a research based position.
Yeah, it's a big problem that they are responsible for accreditation, and also after your licensing, to continue your license, you have to apply for accreditation, and they have the courses like colonializing psychology and discursive psychology and narrative therapy,
Yeah,
all these non unscientific approaches that are really just cover for social justice activism.
yeah,
And they promote this as absolutely ridiculous, and it has nothing to do with treating people in a time where mental health is has really replaced so many things that we need, clergy, faith-based activities. We're going to therapy instead. And so we need to get a grip. We need to somehow self correct, like proper medical fields do. And I don't include psychiatry in that. I mean, sometimes I really have started to regret that I did that residency. It was interesting in the beginning,
mm-hmm.
but now I've become completely disillusioned.
Yeah,
And so I'm doing what I can to try to expose and help this self correction, whatever I can do. That people have different sources where they can go and say what is actually I'm being giving this therapy. What are the dangers with this, and to have a voice that says something different. And this so that I'm doing what I can, but it's absolutely appalling these therapies that the APA is advocating, and you just go into the curriculum of the different universities, you can find it all there.
Yep.
And the heads of the departments as well, they are postmodernists at heart. The books that they've written, it's they don't they teach much more of Kenneth Gergen than they do of Jung and Freud. Of course, their theories can also be questioned, but at least they were sort of looking for um, an objective way to look at human behavior. At least they had that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said, Hannah, in one of your, I don't know whether it's in a blog or in your videos, but I remember you saying that people constantly contact you saying, hooray, that you're, good for you for saying all this, but you're very much a lone voice, aren't you? I mean, you get this applaud from these people who are not in a position, they feel they're not in a position to speak out. You're speaking for them. I know how that feels, but I'm very pleased you are out
Yeah.
there, and I hope you will eventually acquire a little army of your own of people who are in a position to talk about what's happening in psychology and psychiatry, and really challenge the very dangerous trends that are occurring at the moment.
Yeah, there are people are very scared. They're very and they are as soon as you say anything, they'll come for your license, which is why I'm happy because I'm a doctor, and so it's a little bit more difficult to say, okay, we're gonna strip you of your credentials. It's not so common as it is in countries I mean, it's in Norway, it's in German-speaking countries. You're experiencing it in Australia. It's definitely happening in the U.S. and Canada that they're stripping psychologists of their licenses as
Yep.
soon as they speak up against these issues. I just spoke to a German psychologist. I had him on Psychobabble, and I haven't heard from him now in a long time. He spoke up against this after having been the head of psychology in a German hospital for 30 years and authored several books. He speaks up about liberal women tending more towards mental disorders than conservative women, and immediately they came for him. It was a horror show. And so I'm happy to be in a position where I don't have to be afraid of that. I'm certain I'll never be hired by a hospital again, but I can work privately, and so I do, and I provide the support that I can. And but therapists are contacting me saying, I've been working so and so many years, thank God I'm out of the system, and saying, keep going, because what you're saying is true, and we are not helping patients, we're just furthering our own agenda.
Yep. Yeah. Well, congratulations on your work, Hannah. And I'm very glad you could join me here today. And I'm sure you'll get another little flood of mail from people who are, sending you their best wishes and wishing you, to gather together more people to talk about this very worrying aspect of our society. And I think psychology and psychiatry has a significant influence on the way we conduct our personal lives, and we need to get it right.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, come and visit my Substack. It's Psychobabble with Spier. I'm also on YouTube, also there, Psychobabble with Spier. And I'm sure you'll find some content there that speaks to you.
Yeah, we'll be putting that up below the video.
Thank you so much.
I'll tell people how to find you, Hannah. Thank you again. Bye bye.